Life could be a dream. Life could be a dream. Do, 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 shaboom.
Hi everyone, this is video number 5 bajillion, and in this podcast we'll be talking about the impact of human activities on ecosystems. We'll go more into depth throughout the video on specific examples of human activity and the effects they have had on ecosystems. So first off, we want to explain the components of an ecosystem. An ecosystem is defined as all the living and non-living components in an environment. So an ecosystem is broken into two separate parts, the biotic and abiotic factors. Biotic factors are the living components in an environment, while abiotic factors are the non-living components. We'll explain both into greater detail now. The living components of an ecosystem are referred to as biotic factors, which include all the living things in that ecosystem. In this example of an ecosystem found in a lake, the biotic factors would include the algae growing on the bottom of the lake, the fish, insects, frogs, birds, decomposers, bacteria, fungi, and any other living thing that exists in or around the lake.
Each organism is organized into a different category depending on how each one gets its food. These different categories of organisms make it what is called the food chain. A food chain is basically a sequence of events of who eats who. In Disney terms, it's the circle of life. The very bottom of the food chain is composed of organisms known as producers. Producers are organisms that produce their own energy from the sun through photosynthesis. In this example of a lake, the algae and other plants found at the bottom of the lake absorb the energy from the sun and go through their chloroplasts to use carbon dioxide to turn it into a usable source of energy, glucose. There are some producers that make their own food without the sun, and these producers use what is known as chemiosmosis to turn chemicals into a usable form of energy, but we won't go into depth with that today.
Alright, so above the producers would be the primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers. So for example, we could have an herbivore, an omnivore, and a carnivore, although usually food chains and food webs are a lot more complex than this. And then consumers are unable to make their own food, so they basically rely on eating other organisms to get their food. So for example, fish eat algae to get their food, frogs eat insects around the lake, and birds eat other fish. And then finally, at the end of the food chain would be the decomposers, which basically break down all the dead and decaying material and release the nutrients back into the ecosystem. So in conclusion, the more genetic diversity an ecosystem has, the better chance it has of basically sustaining itself through natural disasters, diseases, and other major ecological disturbances.
The second component of an ecosystem is its non-living components, referred to as abiotic factors, which include the climate, water temperature, air quality, soil quality, amount of light, and other things. Abiotic factors have an effect on all organisms in an ecosystem. As in this lake, if the amount of sunlight were to decrease for a long enough period of time, the producers, in this case the algae, would be unable to go through photosynthesis, thus killing them off. If all the algae die off, it significantly decreases the food supply for the consumers of the lake, the fish. If the fish population dies down, then the population of hawks and other secondary consumers would also decrease, eventually leading to a downfall in this lake's ecosystem. Other abiotic factors include the effects of human activity on ecosystems, specifically human waste.
Alright, so now that we've explained the components of an ecosystem, we can elaborate on the effects that humans have on the disruption of ecosystems through these two examples. The first example is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So the ocean is our world's biggest ecosystem, from producers like algae and phytoplankton to secondary and tertiary consumers like the great white shark and the minke whale. The ocean is also bombarded by human pollution every day, from runoff fertilizer and soap to fishing lines and soda cans. It was first discovered in 1997 by Captain Charles Moore, and it is constantly being shifted and moved by ocean and wind currents, but exists beneath the water.
Plastic in general constitutes over 90% of all marine trash. The reason why plastic is so bad for ecosystems is because it's not biodegradable. Plastic only photodegrades, meaning it is constantly being broken into smaller and smaller pieces, but never into smaller and smaller compounds. All of the plastic in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, covering an area twice the size of Texas, can be easily digested by filter feeders and other animals, which can poison their bodies and/or lead to deadly blockages. Although larger animals can get caught and choke on all the trash, the Pacific Garbage Patch has the potential to completely destroy ocean ecosystems, because filter feeders that consume the photodegraded plastic are then consumed by bigger animals like whales and dolphins. If both the bottom and the top of the food chain are wiped out, the whole ecosystem of the ocean could collapse. Not to mention that over 1 million birds and marine animals die from consuming or being caught in the debris. Humans have a more profound effect on their oceans than they may think, and most think it's time we start paying more attention.
Another example of a human's impact on the natural ecosystem is colony collapse disorder, which is when entire beehives collapse when the bees needed to maintain them and the queen do not return. The main cause of these things are pesticides, though scientists have also speculated that climate change is another reason. Studies by Dr. Richard Gill in London confirmed that 2 pesticides are just enough to kill almost 100% of bees they're exposed to. This impacts the metabolic processes in the bees and also the hive's communication abilities.
And our final example is bird migration. So in a study of robin migration done by Dr. Henrik Moritzen in Germany, they basically put these robins in simple huts, and when they were put in these huts, the birds could not make sense of north from south. But when they put these birds in Faraday cages that block out weaker electromagnetic fields, such as those found in electronics, but actually don't shield out Earth's static magnetic fields, birds had no problem finding north if the cage was fully screwed down and grounded. So overall, this study concluded that human technology inhibits bird migration. So what we can take from all of this is that we as humans have a significant impact on our planet's ecosystems and the organisms that live in them, and we have the power to determine whether our influence is beneficial or detrimental. The first step we need to take is to learn and understand how our actions affect ecosystems and how we can remedy the issues that we currently have. Earth's biodiversity and resources are things that many people seem to take for granted or believe exist solely for their own consumption and disposal, but they are not inexhaustible, and everyone must do their part.
Humans are part of Earth's ecosystems. We're not just spectators to nature, we're a part of nature's circle of life. Without the rest of the globe, animals, plants, abiotic, biotic, no one would exist. And we know that was helpful.